Okay, straw poll. Who knows what goes on inside a computer? Really, Ali? I shouldn't sound so surprised. Yeah, Sam Evans. Yeah, I believe you as well, Ali, but I definitely believe Sam. Fantastic. Computers are amazing. I mean, it's only when they go wrong, isn't it, that you have that conversation. Oh, you know, however did we live before computers? I mean, I use computers for all sorts of stuff. I use it for communicating what I want to say, for receiving messages, for keeping in touch with friends, for finding information, for producing things, artwork, documents, films, all sorts of stuff. I use it for shopping, I use it for banking. I use computers just every day of my life, very nearly, for all sorts of things. I've even got a computer in my pocket now, in the size of a phone, which is so many thousand times more powerful than the first ZX81 1K. Anybody else have a Sinclair ZX81 1K? Yeah, okay. With the, was it a 16 kilobyte RAM extension on it? Ridiculous, ridiculous. And now, you know, I've got a phone with an 8 gigabyte memory card in it. Crazy. But we totally rely on computers. I have got no idea. I know how to install bits of software or remove bits of software from the computer. Once or twice I have taken the back off the computer to add a RAM card in the back, with Sam's help, of course. Not doing that on my own independently. But even looking inside the computer, I mean, what are all those little thingies doing there on the circuit boards, okay? I know what a circuit board is, but the circuit board is full up with little chips and thingies. And how do they produce what I see on my screen and store the information and send the information? Only Sam knows. Only Sam and Arlen, presumably some other people who make computers know about that. And yet, every single day of my life, I entrust what I want to say and what I want to do and my finances and all sorts of things to these machines when I have no idea whatsoever how they work. I want to tell you 3 stories this morning. One of them is a story, or one of them is 3 stories actually, from the Bible. The second one is a historical story, and the third one is a personal biographical story. I'm going to attempt to tell you all of them in the next 10 minutes. I'll be quite surprised if I manage that. But anyway, we'll give it a go. Here's the first story. It's a story of 3 Jewish boys. The first one of them was John, the second one who was a friend of Jesus, the second one was Paul, who met Jesus after he had died and risen from death, and the third one was John, another John who had a vision of Jesus. All of them were good Jewish boys. All of them would have grown up knowing that there is one God. All of them would have recited the Shema from Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. There is one God. There would have been no question in all of their minds that there was one God, one deity, and no other as they grew up. John was a fisherman. He was fishing with his brother James. Their dad's name was Zebedee. What a great name. And they were fishing from their boat when Jesus came along the shore and said, "Follow me." And there was something about this guy, Jesus. And they left their nets and they went and they followed him. And this guy, John, was only young at the time, but he spent most of the next 3 years of his life with Jesus. He heard the things that Jesus said. Some of the sayings of Jesus we've already talked about in The Secret. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He heard Jesus say things like, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. If you've seen me, Philip, you've seen the Father. He heard Jesus say things like, before Abraham was, I am, claiming that divine name for himself. He saw Thomas talking to Jesus. He saw lots of people's reaction to Jesus. He saw Thomas talk to Jesus and say after the resurrection, my Lord and my God. And Jesus blessing him for saying that, not recoiling in horror as most Jewish people would do at the idea that anything other than Yahweh could be ascribed with deity. He saw the things Jesus did as well. He described them as 7 signs. There was the walking on the water. There was the turning the water into wine at the wedding. The feeding of the 5,000. I think there are 3 healings in the 7 signs. What's the 7th one? I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, look up signs in John's Gospel and you'll see these things that Jesus did. And the sum total of all of that was that John, later in his life, when it came time to write down the stuff that he knew about Jesus, John wrote down, in the beginning was the Word. He was talking about Jesus as the embodiment of wisdom, the voice of God, using that metaphor to describe Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then there was Paul. Paul was not a friend of Jesus. Paul hated Jesus and hated all followers of Jesus and was spending all his enemies trying to have followers of Jesus thrown into prison. That's what he did. He had special permission from the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem to go to Damascus to persecute Christians. That was his raison d'etre in life, to persecute Christians. And suddenly, Jesus appeared to him. The people who were with him heard the voice, but only Paul saw the blinding light. And the voice said, Saul, Saul. His name before was Saul, and his name later became Paul. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul said, who are you, Lord? And the voice said, it's me, Jesus, who you've been seeking to persecute. And Jesus sent him to tell other people about the good news, about the secret, about this message. And Paul faithfully preached about Jesus around most of the Mediterranean world, was single-handedly responsible for writing about 1/3 of the New Testament and for a massive expansion of Christian faith around the Roman Empire. And shortly after he was converted, not long after he was converted, Paul wrote down that he had seen the glory of God in the face of Jesus. And then later on, in more reflective mode, Paul said that God was pleased for all of his fullness to dwell in Jesus, the fullness of God dwelling in bodily form. And he expanded that in a circular letter that we call the letter to the Colossians today. And he said, in Jesus all things were made. Through him all things were made. Now, every Jew knows that there are 2 kinds of things. There is God, and there is stuff that is made. And yet Paul, this good Jew, this super Jew, in a lot of ways, says that Jesus was on the creator side of that divide. Jesus is the creator, not the created. And then there was John. And John was in prison. He was exiled because he believed in Jesus. And he was on an island called Patmos, which he couldn't get off of. A bit bigger than Robben Island or than Alcatraz. A decent-sized island, but nonetheless he couldn't get off it. And he was imprisoned there. And he had a vision of Jesus. And he was a good Jewish boy too. And in that vision, what he saw was people worshipping Jesus. The whole of heaven worshipping Jesus, and Jesus sharing the throne of God and the titles of God. At the start of the book of Revelation that John wrote, God says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then at the end of that book, Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So these 3 good Jewish boys wrote this stuff that now makes up a good chunk of the New Testament. And what they said was that Jesus was and is divine. They were still good Jews. They still believed that there was only one God. But they also believed now that Jesus was divine. That Jesus was the Son of God in a completely different and exclusive way. So that's the first story. The second story, fast forward 400 years, is the story of a man called Athanasius. You heard of Athanasius? One or two of you have. Have you heard the saying, Athanasius contra mundum? No? No? Have you heard anybody say, somebody or other, contra mundum? David contra mundum? I was looking around for somebody else, and all I could see was David's everywhere. Joel contra mundum. Let me tell you about Athanasius. He was an Egyptian chap. He was born in 298 AD and he died in 373 AD. He was the bishop of Alexandria. So he was born in Egypt and he lived in Alexandria. But he spent 17 years of his life in exile. Now fairly early on in his career in the church, he was part of the Council of Nicaea. Now, if you know history, you'll know that the Council of Nicaea took place in 325 AD. It was convened by the Roman Emperor Constantine to bang some Christian heads together and get them to agree about who Jesus was. And what they did at that council was that they decided they did not believe, as a man called Arius had been teaching. He was there at the Council of Nicaea, and he was saying that Jesus was on the created side of things. He was great, yes, but he had a beginning. He was created by God. So he wasn't God in that sense that we've been talking about a minute ago. And what the council did was they came up, there's a Spanish guy called Hosius there, and he came up with the word homoousios. Familiar with the word homoousios? It means of one essence. The Father and the Son are of one essence. And that was the word that they used to say, no, Arius was wrong, and it's true that Jesus was divine. Now, some people will tell you that was the Emperor Constantine deciding that Jesus was divine. That's complete nonsense. Lots of Christians have believed it before that time in various different ways, actually. Divine and on the same level as God the Father, divine on a slightly different level, as Origen would have said, but nonetheless equal with God in having no beginning and no end. Lots of people believed that before the Council of Nicaea. Athanasius was there, and he saw that happen, and he was dead keen on this homoousios business. But the problem was subsequent emperors didn't agree. Subsequent emperors favoured Arius over this homoousios idea, and so Athanasius, as bishop of Alexandria, was exiled 5 times by 4 emperors. But he constantly stuck to his guns, and as a more favourable emperor came around, he was able to go back to Alexandria. And what Athanasius said was, look in the New Testament, and you will see that in the New Testament people worship Jesus. And you only worship God. Therefore, Jesus is God. It's one of the things that Athanasius said over and over and over again. But he also said this: if Jesus were not divine, if Jesus were not God, did not have godness about him, how could we know that we are put right with God through Jesus? Because we'd be put right with Jesus, obviously, but how could we know that we'd be put right with God? Now, you might think that sounds like a subtle thing to say, but actually it's got a cast iron practical outworking, and that is this: when people don't believe that Jesus was divine, they spend their lives working hard to try and please God and to earn a place in heaven. Does that sound familiar? Can you think of a group of people that don't think Jesus is divine and spend their lives working hard to try and earn a place, not in heaven, on the new earth? You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses, who are here with us every week. You ask them how to be saved, and the answer is do stuff. If you ask me how to be saved, the answer is believe in Jesus. And that is because Jesus' sacrifice is not quite enough. if he's not divine, which is exactly what Athanasius said. Third story, it's a story from 1989, bringing you right up to date. And a 13-year-old boy is sat in a Christian rock concert, thinking this music is a lot cooler than the music that we have in our church. I think if I heard it today, I would probably think it was slightly cheesy. There was one guy with a keytar. Do you know what a keytar is? No? It's a keyboard that you play like this, with a pitch bend on the end. No? None of you remember the 1980s? Okay, never mind. So this guy's playing a keytar and he's preaching about Jesus. And one of the things he says is God has told me that there's somebody here tonight who would like to believe in God, would like to believe in Jesus, but doesn't actually know whether they're real or not. Well, God is saying to you, I am real and I want you to follow me. And this 13-year-old boy sat there on a blue plastic chair in the assembly room at Fuller Baptist Church in Kettering in Northamptonshire one evening in 1989, thought to himself, you know what, that is me. Somehow I just know that that is God saying to me, come and follow me. And I can tell you for certain that at that time I had no idea that Jesus had godness about him. It wasn't until I started seriously reading the Bible, which wasn't really, if I'm honest, until about 5 years after that I started to realise just how wild and radical the claims of Jesus about his own identity was. And I certainly didn't know anything, probably for another 15, 20 years after that, about Athanasius and Homoousius and the Father and the Son being of one essence. I didn't know any of that stuff. All that I knew was that there was this Jesus who was calling to me to come and follow him. And what I found, and I still don't get it, I mean, how can somebody be with God and be God at the same time? It is a mystery. But sometimes you've just got to live with mysteries you can't explain. You know, what I have found out is that Jesus promised that those who followed him would have peace. And the Bible says that if we follow Jesus, we will have hope, we'll have purpose in life. He will be with us. We will pray and we'll see answers to prayer. All the things that people are talking about on the those secret real-life story films that you might have seen. God makes all of those promises, and what I've found day by day, every day, since that day in 1939, I have prayed and I have had a sense. 39? 89? I'm going to cut that bit out of the video. What I found every day since that day in 1989 is that I have talked to God and God has been with me. I have prayed and I have seen answers to prayer. And yes, there are still things that are a mystery, that are a secret that I just don't understand. And maybe I never will understand. But just like every day, I put my faith in these machines. These machines, I've got no idea what's happening in there, but every day I put my faith in this little machine for my diary and for accessing my bank account and for 100 other different things, for directions to get to places, for the latest news, to read the Bible even. Every day I put my faith in this thing. I've got no idea how it works. It's exactly the same with God. Every day I put my faith in him. And unlike this, what I find is that he is ultimately reliable and ultimately true and ultimately real.